Welcome to the Silver Fox Entrepreneurs Podcast, a series of interviews to inform, inspire and support men later in life who want to start their own enterprise for profit or for pleasure. Good afternoon or good morning or wherever you are in the day. Welcome to the Den. Today, I'm very excited to be talking to Jay Shapiro, who's in a warm and sunny place. And Jay and I met each other, first of all, back in Singapore, back in 95, 96, when Jay introduced me to Google. So Jay's been an innovative and visionary guy, especially in tech. Jay, welcome to Silver Fox Entrepreneurs.
Thanks so much. Pleasure to be here.
Jay, tell us, where you are now and what you're doing.
So I'm in Nairobi, Kenya, in East Africa, and been here for a few years now. And I run a company called UsikuGames, which is a mobile game, social impact mobile games company. And what you see behind me is what's called the Nairobi Game Development Center, which I've just built and is launching this weekend, actually. So I'm part of the entrepreneur scene, if you will, that's burgeoning in East Africa.
That's fantastic. But you're originally from Canada.
Yeah.
So, and you shared earlier on about your dad being a professor in entrepreneurship. And when I met you, you were starting Blue Interactive in Singapore. So how'd you go from Canada to Singapore and now to East Africa?
I'm basically just working my way around the Commonwealth countries, trying to tick them all off. So I grew up in Canada. I left there in 95, went to Singapore, where we met, spent about 13 years there, and started one of the very first digital agencies, which, as you pointed out already, at the start was called Blue Sphere Interactive. Actually, it was a very .com-y terrible name. That then just became Blue, and I grew that from a 3-person little third floor walk-up apartment ad agency into today it's the 4th largest digital agency in the world. We sold at WPP in 2007. Today it's called Possible, and it carries on. It was Marketing Magazine's Agency of the Year twice, and so I left Singapore in 2008. And moved to New York, and was there for about 8 years, where I started a couple things. One was a nonprofit foundation called Do Good As You Go, which was a network of about 500 entrepreneurs who were traveling the world for work or for pleasure, and doing volunteer work on 4 continents as they traveled at street kid shelters and orphanages and the like, doing skills transfer workshops. And at the same time, I started my next venture, which is a company called AppMaker, it was a drag and drop mobile app publishing platform, became the world's largest mobile app publisher, with 3.5 million apps. And then Donald Trump happened. And as you said, I'm Canadian, so I was never really at home there. We decided to leave, and so I've got 2 kids, and I was working remotely. We at AppMaker, we had a team of 65 people, but they were all scattered around the world. And my wife travels nonstop for her job. She runs an accelerator, and so we said, "Look, we can live anywhere." And we took our kids out of school, and we packed 1 backpack each, and we spent a year traveling around the world. Shopping, trying to figure out where our next location should be, and we absolutely fell in love with Nairobi. And there's a real sort of entrepreneurial buzz that's happening here. There's a sense of optimism, and Jim, I know you'll relate. Nairobi to me today absolutely feels like Singapore did in the early 90s. Wow. It's a little rough around the edges, but there's just this buzz. There's this energy that you can feel that it's about to pop. And they have very similar backgrounds. They both got their independence from Britain within 2 years of each other. And so I'm doing it all over again, if you will.
Wow, fantastic. And actually, when we were children, I lived in West Africa and we actually used to go to Nairobi from Nigeria. because my relatives were surgeons out there. So my family has quite a long connection with Africa. Also have some relatives still living in Kenya. I must introduce you to them. And tell me, why do you think, I mean, you've been an entrepreneur since you were young, but now you're an entrepreneur a little bit later on in life, not quite yet 50, but closing in. Tell us how you think it's different now, Jay, being an entrepreneur, as a maturepreneur rather than when you're in your 20s.
Well, I would definitely say I may be an oldpreneur, but I don't think I'm a maturepreneur. I'm an immaturepreneur, just an old one. I realized very early on in my career that I make a really shitty employee. And so I've sort of had no choice but to be an entrepreneur all the way along, because when I see a problem, I want to fix it. And that doesn't always work well when you're, supposed to be meeting goalposts that people set for you or staying in your box.
Tell us, what problem are you trying to solve now? You mentioned you like to go around and solve things, and that's absolutely the case. Tell us about UsikuGames.
Sure. So I came to the realization that what I'm really good at is not building businesses, but building industries. And so I think, Jim, you may have actually been in the room in probably 98, 97 in Singapore when we sat in a bar forming what became the IAB, the Interactive Advertising Bureau.
Yeah, right? I do. That's right. With Duncan Ironside and you and I and a few others, right?
That's right. The head of Yahoo was there. The head of DoubleClick was there. And there was 7 of us. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Right? There were 7 of us in the room. Kevin Rose, who went on to be famous as well. And today, if you look in Singapore at the industry, the head of Google, the head of PayPal, the head of Airbnb are all my ex-employees.
Right.
And we literally built that industry. And I sold that agency in the same month that Steve Jobs launched the iPhone. So I knew that mobile was absolutely going to be the next thing. There was no app industry. And so we went and we built it and created the ecosystem. And now I'm doing that exactly again in Africa with gaming, where today in sub-Saharan Africa, there's 350 million connected smartphones. Wow. That's more than all of the US, Canada, and Mexico combined.
Yeah, I was going to say it's like greater than North America, right?
Yeah, absolutely, by far. And it's growing at 20% year over year, whereas the US is growing at 20%. And the median age today in Europe is 53, but the median age here is 19. So you take all those connected devices and all that energetic youth, and it's perfect for gaming, but there are no game companies here. And when you talk to some of the international game companies, they're like, oh, Africa, do people have phones? Is there internet? The fact is there's 4G connection throughout the country with 80 megabit lines and everything. It's much further advanced than anywhere else I've been. And it's perfect for it. And so what we decided to do was to say, okay, how do we build that industry through gaming, but recognizing where we are, use the power of gamification to solve difficult social challenges. And so we're doing education, agriculture, climate change, women's empowerment through games to try as a what you call a double bottom line, although I hate that term, of doing both social impact and profit.
That sounds fantastic. And so you say about, you like to create industries. This goes quite in the Steve, it was a Jim Collins sort of big, hairy ass goal style challenges. You're on your second, third of doing this. What would be some of the behaviors or skill sets that you've noticed in yourself or in others that make that possible? Because that's really a big, big challenge to set yourself. Are there some tips or some behaviors that you do every day or every week that you'd like to share?
So I think the number one is connections, connecting people, because no one person can build an industry. Branson may claim he did, but by and large, it takes a village, right? Yep. And so constantly be seeking out other people who are not yet in the ecosystem, but could be or should be, that offer some value and bring something to the table, and then find a way for them to be successful. because nobody will want to participate in a new industry unless there's something in it for them. And so constantly looking out for ways to help others and to make it valuable to them such that it's a symbiotic relationship and they then help with your broader mission of creating that new ecosystem.
Yeah, Tony Robbins, I think, says, the more you serve, the more you earn, so it seems counterintuitive, but seems to absolutely be the case. And what about on a day-to-day basis, Jay, in terms of you do connections, how do you do that? Are you doing that through LinkedIn, through Facebook? You sending pigeons, bows and arrows? What are you doing in terms of getting those connections?
All of the above.
Okay.
Constantly. Through social networks, but also looking in odd places. When you meet friends of friends or in a social environment, whatever. Within our company, for example, I now have a team of rappers, hip hop rappers that I never thought I would be hiring. Rappers. But if you want to create local African games, they have to have local African soundtracks. And so our first studio before we built this place was in what's called the Kibera slum. It's the largest slum in Africa, here in Nairobi. And we actually built our studio in the middle of the slum because part of our social mission was to do create economic opportunities through training, hiring, education in the slums. And so we found all these great ghetto boys who are rappers,
Wow.
and they've been doing our soundtracks. So, sometimes you have to look under odd rocks to find the gems. It's not necessarily LinkedIn.
No, okay, that's fantastic. So it's sort of going offline, as it were, as well. And then in terms of what you have built there, because it looks fascinating, do you want to share with us what have you built? How big is it? How many stories? How many people are going to be in there? What's the business model you've got behind that?
So when we started out growing our studio in Kibera, we knew we needed a permanent home. We needed something bigger. I wanted it to be in the slum so that we could build this sort of largest game studio in all of Africa in the slum where innovation comes out of the slum. And unfortunately, it wasn't practical. And so then we found this space, which is the top 2 floors of a building called Diamond Plaza in Nairobi. It had been abandoned for 8 years. And anybody who knows my days at Blue will know that we found a series of abandoned buildings.
I was going to say, you did that.
That we turned into amazing offices, and they often are the most incredible spaces.
Yeah. So
this is a 6,000 square foot, 2-story barn, basically, that was built on the roof of this shopping mall. And we've created it as a community space. It's much larger than we needed for Usiku. But we said, because of my background and funding that we have the means to go out and build, a green screen studio that's behind me here, and a podcasting studio that we have downstairs, and a slide, and all the other fun stuff
to get there.
That goes with it. But a real startup, a small cottage industry game developer who's maybe working out of their bedroom needs all these things, but doesn't have access to them. It doesn't have the capital to build them. But at the same time, I don't need them 24 hours a day. And so we said, all right, well, let's build something bigger than what we need, put in all the resources, sprinkle a little bit of mentorship and experience on top of it, and make it more of an incubator for the gaming industry that is really just getting off the ground here.
Well, that's fantastic. And what about the sort of the caliber of the people that you're meeting, Jay, in terms of work? Are you having, I remember in Singapore in 95, there was a lot of training that needed to be done around expectations and about skills. And the government took an active program in that as well. Are you having a hard time finding people there? Or are you using the internet to find people from around the world to plug into your app's development and so on?
No. So in my last business, we had 65 people who were on literally 6 continents working. And we had a mantra of hiring not the best people who coincidentally live within 30 miles of some arbitrary office, but we hired the best people wherever they were in the world. And this one, I've tied one hand behind my back because we've insisted that we only hire in Kenya and hiring Kenyans particularly, not expats. which definitely makes it more challenging. At the scale that we're at the moment, and we're only 16 people for the now, it's been easy to find really great people. When we hit 200 people, I suspect it will be much harder.
Yeah.
But for the moment, we've been good. And there's a lot of funding and effort and time that's going in at the moment from some of the international NGOs like UKAid and USAID. That is all going into vocational training, particularly in the IT schools. So there's great developers who are coming out of those programs, but like lemmings going off a cliff, they've then got nowhere to go. And they're falling into the abyss because they need a career and there's just no employers. And so that's what we're trying to then create is a soft landing for those graduates coming out. And that's why, for example, in our game development center here, we give 6 months free membership to any graduates from the gaming program, one of the local colleges, to say, look, if you've gone through that and you know the start can be difficult, we'll give you access to all the resources for free.
That's amazing. What in terms of costs then, Jay, what we've seen in Asia over the last 25 years really is an inflation of salaries to the extent that now Singapore is as expensive as London when it comes to hiring. In Kenya,
and flats and food and nights out.
Absolutely, it's as expensive as London now. What about the cost of living and the cost of hiring in Kenya? Can you get a sort of a margin sort of arbitrage there?
Well, because the environment here is going through a period of transition, it's really bifurcated. So you have absolutely the sort of diplomat core at the top and the few expats who are here who are earning top salaries or international salaries and having their housing paid and all that. I, unfortunately, am not one of those as an entrepreneur, but they absolutely do exist. At the same time, the bulk of the country are making less than $10 a day.
Right.
And so, those two will have to come together. I'm hoping that the bottom will come up rather than the top coming down. But I don't think we're going to see the hyperinflation that we saw in Singapore. But it's time for this country to come up.
And then in terms of for yourself, how do you kind of stay abreast of what's going on both in Africa and around the world, Jay? Because you're moving into a place that sounds like it's developing rather than developed. So, in a place like Singapore, there was an amazing cohort, as you've already explained, of people that all moved there and all kind of fed off each other. How are you kind of staying in touch? How are you kind of building that kind of chemistry and energy in and around you? Because I know you feed off that too, and you inject your wisdom into that group.
One of the first things I did when moving here was to find a dads group, basically, or create a dads group. And I did the same thing when I moved to New York. I created the Geek Dads Network. It was called the Geek Dads Drinking Society.
Right.
And I'm really trying to get that off the ground here as well, of just finding like-minded maturepreneurs, tech people who are going through the same challenges as we are, and creating a microcosm of what Silver Fox is.
Right.
We are start going out for lunches and coffees and drinks and whatever it may be, and commiserating and sharing wisdom. And that's the fastest way into the local environment, because there are gentlemen here who are, third generation here, and they know everybody. And so that's the best way, I find. And really in terms of the global news and all that, obviously we have Google and everything here, but I'm trying to disconnect myself as much as possible from the U.S. news, which I find to be cathartic. It's just not helpful in any way to your daily process.
Yeah, no, that's right. I think we have to stay focused on and also trying to control what's relevant to us. In terms of sort of practical takeaways, and this could be, you've got so many experiences both around the world and as an entrepreneur, Jay. Are there some sort of things that you think that are common mistakes that you've seen other entrepreneurs make? What would you say are things over the last 20 odd years that either you've made, or you see other entrepreneurs where they're failing? Because part of what we're trying to do with this group is to help people to decide what to do, but also decide what not to do. Wonder if you've got any wisdom for us on that.
Excuse me. I would definitely say over the last 20 years, the worst mistakes in my career that I've made as an entrepreneur were the right decisions that I made that I just took too long to make. Where you know what you need to do. There's a person you need to fire or downsize a company or exit a market or whatever it may be. You know you have to do it, and you just hold off too long. And in the end, you wind up doing it anyhow, but you suffer from having delayed. And so I would say, when you know, just do it and rip the bandage off. So that's absolutely the first one, I would say. And the second one, which I think is connected to that, is that of all the bad decisions that you can make and the mistakes that you can make, probably 90% of them can be undone or fixed or reversed. So the actual risk of doing them is not that bad. So just do it and try. And I'd rather make the mistake and then fix it than wait around until I have enough information to try and make the right decision. So absolutely, I'd say that's a core element of being an entrepreneur as well. Because, and this is not my line, unfortunately, I wish I had said it originally, but if you're not failing at least 50% of the time, then you're not actually experimenting. And to be an entrepreneur, the foundation is compulsive optimization, constantly trying to find problems and solve them. And in order to do that, you have to experiment. You have to be willing to get things wrong. As I say, if you make a souffle, you have to break some eggs. And be willing to take that risk.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely fantastic advice. And I think that for all of us that are doing that, there's always that sort of sense of, are you doing the right thing or not, when the results don't come out so quickly? So what would be your piece of advice? Because people that are afraid of failing, you say just do it. And how do they recover if they fail? What would be, how have you picked yourself up indeed, if you have ever failed, Joe? You've been so successful. How do you think people
absolutely. We'll talk today about the successful businesses. There have been others that have been less successful. No, look, failure is not something to be embarrassed about. I think failure is something to be proud of. It's an absolute core element of being an entrepreneur. And if you're not failing, then you're not really an entrepreneur. You're just, you're just working in a job, but you happen to be the employer. And so I think the way you pick yourself up, or the way you do it, is to first recognize when you have made that bad mistake. And the only way to do that is to constantly be listening and taking information and evaluating constantly, because at least the first year or 2 years of any venture is fumbling in the dark, trying to find the light switch. And at some point you find it, click, it comes on, and great, you've got a business. But for that first year, if you think you know what the business is going to be, or you think you know what you're going to do, you're full of shit. Nobody does. We're all just, you got to try and figure it out. And that requires constant using your senses to evaluate and humbly admit that what's not working.
And Jay, you're a brave man on many, many levels, inspirational in many wisdom areas. Could you just tell us then, if people want to find out more about you, Jay, where can they go to get in touch with you and find out more?
Well, sadly, there's a lot of Jay Shapiros on the internet. So if you just Google Jay Shapiro, you'll find a movie star, and a dentist, and a lawyer, and they're not me. So don't blame me for anything they said. On Twitter, I am letter J _ Shapiro, SHAPIRO. I am on Facebook, and if you Google Jay Shapiro and Nairobi, I guarantee you I am the only one here.
I was going to say you must be the only Jay Shapiro in Nairobi. And I'll also put your details in
contact.
I'm
not the only Shapiro. I met another one last week. It's amazing. Or you can go to UsikuGames, USIKU.games. That's our website. You can contact me through there as well.
Great. Jay, thank you so much for joining us on Silver Fox Entrepreneurs Podcast today. It's been an absolute pleasure to reconnect with you and to be inspired once again by you. Some 20 odd years since we first met, and you inspired me back then and you inspire me today. So thank you once again.
Jim, I'll tell you, the only reason I was willing to do this was I listened to the previous episodes. I absolutely have been inspired by them. I listened to them in the car on my way to work, and I'm happy to contribute one. And thank you for putting this all together. It's a valuable resource for all of us, and I'm just happy to be part of it.
Mate, big hugs going out to you in Kenya, and I look forward to seeing you.
All right, thanks, mate.
Do subscribe or leave a rating, and for more information, please visit silverfoxentrepreneurs.life and drop me an email. I'd love to hear from you, and maybe we can get you on the podcast and share what you know, or let me know what you'd like to know. Thank you once again. Have a great day.